Hi, welcome to another episode of V's Perspective. In this episode, we'll look at India-US relationship and the rapidly flowing water under the bilateral bridge that US and India have built over the past 2 decades. Now, clearly, US and India have now today what they call a global comprehensive partnership agreement, in which, of course, you have components like four strategic partnerships for strategic agreements like the Limoa, Gismoa, Becca, and Comcasa. Now, for 2 decades or over 2 decades, it clearly seemed that Washington was making this effort to take the relationship in a certain direction, and it has built certain credibility and credence to the relationship, and built trust over the last 2 decades at least. Um, Ever after the 1998 nuclear tests by India. And then suddenly you have Donald Trump administration. Now compare that to Donald Trump first administration. Things were not so different. They had continuity in many ways. But the Trump second administration has clearly taken a different approach, not just vis-a-vis India, but to most countries in the world, to allies, friends, and partners alike. But what makes India-US relationship really today different than in the past is that there is a gradual shift and signaling that cannot be ignored by New Delhi. And I think it requires a certain solid stance from New Delhi to draw the lines, and I think which the government has in many ways. Um, Now, two or three things are important here. One is that the Trump administration might have gotten its ways vis-a-vis other economies by arm twisting. He cracked a deal a few uh, days ago between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And remember that Armenia and Azerbaijan have been talking for months now between themselves. But yet, I mean, credit should be given where it's due. I mean, just to be able to make them sit and sign an agreement in the Oval Office makes for a newsworthy um, clip. But I think what's important in the case of other larger economies, things are different. So if you look at smaller economies, Trump administration's tariff, etc., may have worked much more effectively than it has worked versus the larger economies. Look at Vietnam. Uh, Vietnam is ready to make an investment in the U.S. They are ready to take a huge tariff on their exports. Look at other smaller countries like Armenia and Azerbaijan. They've agreed because obviously they will have an impact. There are many African countries that may agree to Trump's arm twisting tactics based on tariff. But if you look at larger economies, it's more complicated simply given the fact that the domestic politics weaves in the economic, the layered nature of their economies do not allow them to make sudden changes in their structures and sudden changes in the whole understanding or functioning of the economy. And therefore, you see two, three examples. In the neighborhood of the United States, Canada has taken a stance. Although it has been tariffed over more than 35% in certain sectors, it is looking for diversification. It is not looking for a deal with the United States, although Canada has been a partner for which United States has provided security. They're the members of the Five Eye alliance systems. So I think there is, if you put Donald Trump's tactics or methodology and apply it to larger economies, simply because the intricacies involved, it is unlikely that such tactics will work towards larger economies. Second example is, of course, Brazil. Donald Trump imposed 50% tariff on Brazil. What did Lula say? He took a stand and he said he will not call Donald Trump, but he will call other BRICS members. Now, of course, in the case of Brazil, it's more complicated because you have the ideas of Jair Bolsonaro. You have the context of Jair Bolsonaro, which who Trump wants, outside the investigations and so on and so forth. So I think that's more complicated. But And then finally coming to India, right? Another fourth largest, fifth largest economy. You're suddenly asking or trying to impose certain costs on the daily on the common people of the country without caring about them. And sometimes, most often, the countries won't agree to it simply because a person in rural India shouldn't have to pay the price of foreign policy tactics of the United States. And I think the structural reforms that we're talking about alongside some of these tariffs is obviously the need of the hour. But any knee-jerk reaction to economy, um, or to the Indian economy, when the growth has been decent but less ambitious, may not augur well for the economy. And I think, uh, we are a political country. We are also we have signaled more than any country in the past that we are more autonomous, and we would like to be more autonomous. So I think, given this context, I think the Donald Trump administration needs to stop misreading the ideas, the global comprehensive partnership, and understand it as something that can be pushed and shoved, and forced in a corner to make a certain decision. And I think that's the complication between India and the US relations today. Thanks.